Good morning. Today's daf is going to be Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph and Beis. We're starting now by the Mishnah. So the Mishnah, ha'oimer, if somebody tells his friend, Tnu get zeli ishti, give this get to my wife, or he says, Shtar shichrur zel avdi, or give this shtar shichrur, give this bill of a shichrur, give it to my servant. So then what happened? Umeis, the Meshaleach, died, as the Mefarshim explained, before the Shliach actually received the actual either get or shtar shichrur. So the halacha is, Lo yitnu la'achar misa. This Shliach is not allowed to give, even if he attains the get or the shtar shichrur afterwards, he's not allowed to actually fulfill his shlichus. Why not? So, because as we explained many times, the divorce is only chal, only when the wife actually receives the actual get. That's the difference between a shliach le'ilacha and a shliach le'kabbalah. So the shliach le'ilacha, his shlichus is only chal when the woman actually receives the get. Now, if the husband died before the woman actually received the get, so the whole shlichus, now the connection between the shliach and the mishaleach is now batal. The shliach has no shaychus to the mishaleach. And therefore, so that's why you cannot give the get afterwards. Okay, now, but in the case of Tnu Mana Li'ish Pleini, if the Meshaleach tells the Shliach, I want you to give $100 to this person, Umeis, and then the Naisen died, so the halacha is Yitnu, the Shliach can give the $100 La'achar Misa after he dies, which means the Yarshim will have to pay up. So to recap the Mishnah, we said that if a Meshaleach tells the Shliach, give this get to my wife, or the shtar shichrur to my servant, and then he died before the Shliach actually received either the get or the shtar shichrur, so the Shliach is not allowed to give it to the woman or to the Adin because it's achar misa. However, when it comes to that the Naisen said, give $100, let's say, to this person, and then he died, so the halacha is that he could give it after he dies. And the Yarshim will have to pay up. So now the Gemara is going to discuss the last din of the Mishnah, that there's a matana after Misa. So Amr Rabbi Yisrael Bar Shmuel Bar Marta Mishmei Rav, Rav said a din, Behu, this that the Mishnah says, that you can give, the Shliach can give the mana after the Naisen dies. We're talking about in a case that tzivurin umenachem mekanezavis. We're talking about that the dinners are piled up and placed in a corner at the time of the command. It tells them specifically that the Naisen, let's say before, at the time of the command, he says, I want you to give $100, and let's say in a specific corner, and it's piled up, it's ready to go. So then the halacha is that the Shliach could give the money after, or the Yarshim have to pay up after he dies. But if, let's say, he says, Tamazai, Tnu Mana L'Pleini, give this $100 to this person, and he did not mention where the money is, so the halacha is the Yarshim, the kids, do not have to pay up. That's what Rav is saying. Okay, so now the Gemara wants to analyze exactly what does Rav mean? What does Rav mean by saying that when we say Tnu Mana Li'ish Pleini Umeis Yitnu La'achar Misa, is only if the money is in a specific case, and he said, I want you to give the $100 that are piled up in this place. How exactly does that work? So the Gemara says, B'maya Skinan, how do you understand this din that Rav said? Ilema, if you're telling me we're talking about, in the case Bebari, that the person who gives the money was healthy at the time that he gave the matana, so then the halacha is ki tzivurin ma'hava. What difference does it make if the money is designated or not? You have a fundamental issue that haloi mashach. At the end of the day, the mekabel did not make a meshicha. One of the ways to make a kinyan is you have to actually, when it comes to metaltalin, you have to be moishech the chayfetz into your rishus. It's called meshicha. So l'chayra, when the Naisen tells this Shliach to give the $100 to this person, so let's say he's a bar, he's a healthy person, and the guy died. So at the end of the day, the Naisen never actually made never actually made a Mashiach when the Naisen was alive. So if so, why should the Yarshim have to pay for it? If he didn't make a Mashiach b'chayeh ha-Naisen, So there's no Mashiach, there's no kid, the Chayri doesn't own any of it. Rather, what are we talking about? Our Mishnah is B'shchimina, somebody who is about to die. And the person who's a Shchimina commanded and said, Tanu mana li'ish pleni, and then he died. So the halacha is that Yitnu l'achar misa. And then Rav said that it has to be in a designated area. So the Gemara asks, if we're talking about a Shchimina, my iri tzuvurin, why is Rav saying the din is that only if the money is piled up, ki ein tzuvurin nami, even if the money is not piled up, still the Yorshim should have to pay up. Why? Because we have a din. The divrei shchimera, so that the words are of a shchimera, the halach is kiksuvin v'misurin dami. The words of a shchimera are as if they are considered as though they were written and delivered. And like the smeh in Chesed Mishpat, simlish nun. So Gimel explains what's the difference between ksuvim and misurim. So he says we're talking about karka and metaltlin. But derech klal, karka, how does one acquire property? Is with a shtar. With metaltlin, how does a person acquire metaltlin? This is with meshicha. So the shchimera, the words of the shchimera, just by specifying with his mouth, with his words, it helps sai by karka, that his words work like a shtar, and as well by metaltlin, it's like it was the mekabel made a meshicha. So now the din is that by a shchimera tiksuvim u'chumisurin dami. So it comes out that if we're talking about a shchimera, so this whole din of shitzivurin u'munachin b'kenen zavis, it doesn't make a difference to me, because the words of a shchimera, whenever a shchimera, that's the takanas chachamim, that a shchimera, whatever he says, we listen to. So he says that he wants the money to be given to this person. We listen. It's even though it's an amira bal peh, it has the stronghold, and it has the strength of ashtar and of meshicha. So the question is, what does Rav mean by saying in our Mishnah we're talking about shitzivurin u'munachim b'kenen zavis? So now the Gemara gives two answers. Amar Rav Zvid says, La'ilam, really we're talking about bibadi. We're talking about that the Mishnah is talking about that the person who commanded to give the $100, the money from his bank account is bibadi. We're talking about that the guy who commanded was a healthy guy. And the Mishnah could be explained like the din that Rav said. He said that if a person tells his friend, this is a very interesting case. Reuven tells Shimon, you have $100 that's by you. So he says, you know what, this $100, Tanahu loy lepleni, give it to Levi. So the halacha is, this is called Maiman Shloshtan, that if all three of them are there, the Malva, the lender, and the Leva is there, and the third person who the Malva wants the Leva to give the money to, so the halacha is, Kana, the Mekabel, is Koina, the Mana, with the Amira of the Malva. This is a Takanas Chachamim, that, and the Gemara is going to explain why it works later on in Daf Amud Beis. But the din is, just to make it simple, it's called Maiman Shloshtan, that if you have the Malva and the Leva, and the Malva now tells the Leva, the $100 that the Malva gave the Leva money, and he tells the Leva, the money that you owe me, the $100 that I have by you, I want you to give it to a third person. So Maiman Shloshtan, all three of them work, and the third party will be koinet, even just without amira. Now, we're going to learn a little bit later, but it's important to know this, and like Rashi says, that this din is only by a pikadon, only by a deposit. In other words, by halva, by money, this din of Maiman Shloshtan, according to the Zvid, will not work. Why not? Because at the end of the day, the Malva gives the Leva, let's say Reuven gives a Shimon and gives him a deposit and says, I want you to hold this money by you. It's a pikadon. So now, the time that he says that I want you to take the pikadon and give it to Shimon, to give it to the third party, the pikadon is still around, and so the amira does work. Mashenkin by the halva, we know the din is a famous din, milva leitzah nitna, that the purpose of a loan is to use it. So the fact that Reuven tells Shimon that the money that let's say that's a loan, the loan that I have by you, I want you to give that money to somebody else, the money's not around. So there's no way to, that there should be a kinyan for the third party. So therefore, Rabbi Zvid says that we're talking about a bari, and we're talking about that there's a pikadon, and by manali biotcha tnor pleni, if it's ma'amid shloshton, then the makabel is kaina, but again only by a pikadon, but not by a halva. That's Rabbi Zvid's answer. Papa Amar, and therefore that's what our Mishnah is talking about. When our Mishnah says tana mana liish pleni umeis, we're talking about that the guy was a healthy guy. And when he says Tanam Mana Lish Pliny, it's Ma'amid Shlashtan. We're talking about again that the Mishnah is talking about such a case, and Rav is telling you that the Mishnah is saying that when the mois are in a way of pikadon, so the mafkid tells the guy, now I want you to give this specific money away. Again, it's talking about a healthy person and b'ma'amid shlashton. Papa says, La'ilam, really, the Mishnah is b'shchimina, is talking about that the mitzvah, the person who commanded it to give the money, is a shchimina. And the Rav, this will be another din of Rav. Rav says, shchimina shamar. The shchimina says to the yarshim, if let's say the shchimina tells his kids, I want you to give a mana for my property after I die, and then he dies. So the halacha is like this. If he says manazeh, if he says tunu manazeh, so then the halacha is nice and we give it. But if he says just give a mana stam, just give a mana stamazeh, he doesn't say specifically where the mana is, then the halacha is according to Rav ein neistim, we do not give anything. Why? Because chashina shem mana cover kamar, we're worried that the guy, the Naisen who was giving the money, in other words, this Shchimena that's giving the money and says you should give the money after I die, he perhaps meant that it should be, let's say, in a specific place under the ground. And the Yarshim are not mechuyev to give money from another place if the Naisen didn't have kavanah that it should be in that place. So Rav is talking about that, so therefore Rav says that our mission is talking about that the mais is piled up, that the Naisen tells the Shchimera tells his children, or it says that that only in such a case, I should say the Shchimera over here in our Mishnah, Tnu Manalish Pleni is talking about a Shchimera, and he says clearly give this money to this person, and then he dies. So only if he's specific, then it works. But by Shchimera, if he's not specific, the halacha is that we're worried that he meant something else, and the Yarshim are not mechuyev to actually pay up. So the halacha is we're not worried that the guy meant, the shchimina meant that you should take the money from a place buried under the ground. Rather, if the shchimina says give this money to this specific person, even he doesn't specify, he doesn't say, he just says tanu mana, he doesn't say actually zeh. So then he says mana stam. So then the halacha is that you have to obey, you have to listen to the shchimina. So that's the two answers of Rabbi Zvid and Rabbi Papa. Rabbi Zvid says we're talking about a bari, and it only works by a pikadon, and the Papa says we're talking about a shchimina. So the Gemara answers, the Papa, my time according, the Gemara asks now, the Papa, why doesn't he learn like Reb Zvid that the Mishnah is talking about? You had a healthy person who commanded now and says to give this money, and it's Ma'amid Shlashtan. They're all three of them there. How come he doesn't want to learn like Reb Zvid? So now we're holding Daf Gimel Amid base. The Gemara says, because Rav Papa holds that Ki Omar Rav, when did Rav say that Ma'amid Shlashtan works? He holds Leishna b'milveh and Leishna b'bikadon. There's no difference if it's referring to a loan from the first party to the second party, which we know by a loan, it's very, like we said, milveh leitzanit, it's abstract money. And there's no difference if it's a deposit where specific money is transferred. So he says that basically there's no difference between a milveh and a pikadon. Rather, both of them could be koina in this way. Now, it comes out by the milveh, by the money is not there. It's just it's abstract monetary obligation. Nevertheless, the Chachamim instituted that the kinyan will work in such a way. So you can't say that Rav discusses the Mishnah Ma'amid Shlashtan only if you keveya the Mishnah that we're talking about that it's a pikadon and that the money is piled up in a specific way, because otherwise there will be no difference between a milv and a pikadon. So you wouldn't have to say ma'amer shloshton. Why you say? So you wouldn't have to say mois siburim menachem. Why are you saying that the mois siburim was? So therefore, Rav Papa explained that the Mishnah is referring to pile of money, because we are concerned that about a collection buried under somewhere. And therefore only work in this case. Now, Rav Zvid, my time in Rav Papa, why does Rav Zvid not hold like Rav Papa? So the Gemara answers and says, he cannot establish the Mishnah as referring to a person who's a shchimina. Why? So he says very simple. Because let's look, in the case where the guy says, give this get to my wife, or give this shtashikhr to my servant, and then he dies, so the halacha is, so you can't give it after he dies. So the Gemara says, time of the mace, what's the reason why the guy, what's the reason why, when he says, why can't he give it to the wife or to the eved? Is because the guy died. So let's think. What if the guy was alive? If he's still alive, then it will work. So now, and what's the reason why the shliach could still actually give the get? This time at Amar Tanu is because he said give the get. But haloi Amar Tanu, let's say he did not say Tanu. He just says to write the get, but he doesn't actually say Tanu. He just says kisvu the get. He doesn't say Tanu. So then the halacha would be ein neistem, that you will not listen. Now, but the halacha is that by shchimina, even if he did not say Tanu, he just says write the get. The halacha is neistem that we listen to him. So will come out that the Rebbe says it's impossible to establish the Mishnah as a shchimina, because the fact that the Mishnah says Tnu get zel ishti, and he says Tnu shtar shichr zel avdi, and then he dies. Why doesn't it work? Because he died. If he would still be alive, then the husband says, then by saying Tnu get zel ishti or Tnu shtar shichr zel avdi, he will have to listen. Why? Because he said the words Tanu. But if he says the words, but if he did not say Tanu, he just says Kisvu, then it will not work. But we know that Kisvu by Shchimena will work. And from our Mishnah will come out that it won't work. And now, Zvid, his Messiah is proof and says, Shchimena by Shchimena Afagav Delay Omar Tanu. Even if the Shchimena did not say clearly Tanu, but he just says Kisvu, then the halacha is Kisvin. Then the halacha is that we do write to get the Tran, and the Gemara brings a raya. What's the proof? But initially the Chachamim would say Hayotze b'keilar to somebody who's taken out in a neck chain. He's going to be now executed by the Malchus. V'amar, and he said Kisvu get liishti, write this get for my wife. So what's the din? In the beginning, in the beginning they said that you should write and give this document. In other words, even though he didn't explicitly say Tanu, we understand that this is his intention, and the reason why he said Kisvu instead of Tanu is because he's very, very overwhelmed that he's about to get killed. So we say that when he says Tanu, Kisvu, he means Tanu. Then Chazru Leimar, then the Chacham came back and said, Af HaMafarish V'yetze B'Sheyara. They said that even in a case, somebody who sets sail and somebody departs in a caravan to a far place, so a get is given, a shtashikhr is given, even if he just says to write, he doesn't say to know. Rav Shimon says, Af HaMasuk, he says, even somebody who's dangerously ill, who gives this instructions, the halacha is that we do listen to it. That even if he says kisvu, he means to know. Now, the Mishnah indicates, like we said, that if somebody says Tanu, somebody says, I'm sorry, Tanu, so by the Mishnah indicates that it's referring to one who says give, and therefore it's certainly not speaking about a dying person. Now, just to explain again, what will come out that if a shchimina would be mitzvah to write the get, we would give the get even though he didn't say Tanu. And we're medayik from our Mishnah, then in such a case, that if you would say Tanu, the shchimina, not shchimina, if you would say Tanu, it would come out from our Mishnah that the get will not be chal, it must be, we're talking about a bari, not a shchimina, because the shchimina that says Tanu, we do listen to. Okay, now the Maskiv Lo Rav Ashi objects to this. Who tells you that our Mishnah is like the Shimon Shizuri? Dilma Rabbanani. Maybe the Mishnah is like the Rabbanan who did not include a Chayla Mesukin in their list of those who are not required to say Tenu. If so, it's possible that the Mishnah is referring to a person who is a Shchimira. Okay, now the Gemara says, Gufa, let's go back to the text itself. Rav Huna says in the name of Rav, if a person says, I have 100 dinars in your possession, and Tnula Lupleni, give it to the third guy. So we said, if all three parties are there, so then Kana, the third party, acquires it. Rav says, it makes sense. The Rav's statement is in regard to a deposit. When the owner of the deposit instructs the shliach or the guardian to transfer specific money under his authority to someone else who is in his presence. When it comes to a loan, no, a person cannot dispense with an act of acquisition because the repayment of the loan does not involve specific money. Okay, so then Rav adds himself, Elikim, you should know, I swear, by Elikim is an expression like by Hashem. In truth, Rav said, Afil b'milva, even with regard to a loan, b'mamish lashon does work as well. In a case that he says, someone says to another, I have a loan in your possession. In other words, you owe me money, you owe me a payment for a loan, and give it to so-and-so, then, even in the case of a milva, kana, he will be kana. So the Gemara says, what's the reason? Because very interesting, because it becomes like a borrower, because at the time that the borrower took the loan from the lender, so at that time of giving him the money, what does he say? He says, he says, basically, I'm beholden to you and to anyone who comes based on your authorization. So he's basically saying that any koyach, the loan is coming from your koyach. So anybody who's coming with your koyach, I'm basically being mishtabed to you and to that person. So therefore, when the Malva now, Malva says now to go and give the money to this certain person, this person is coming from the koyach of the Malva, so it's mevar l'mafreya that the b'shas the loan, the loiva was meshubah to the third person. So now Rav Ashi says so now based on this, if that the borrower's obligation to the third party went into effect at the time of the loan, so now I'm going to ask you a shaila, if he transferred in the presence of three parties, if he was ma'amid shloshton to those who will be born, in other words, people who are not born yet, so then they were not there at the time of the giving of the mois, so the recipients does not require it. In other words, the reason at the time that the lender gave the money to the borrower, the person to whom eventually the money will be transferred doesn't exist yet. So therefore the borrower could not have become obligated to him at that point. But based on what you said now, that it should come out that it should work, and we know it doesn't work. And Rav Ashi elaborates, even according to a mayor who holds that you could transfer ownership of an entity that has not yet come into the world, so this statement applies only when he transfers it to an entity, a person that has come into the world. But Rameir agrees with regards to the transfer of ownership of an article to an entity that has not yet come into the world. That's not possible. So since Rav issued his statement in a general manner without specifics, so he holds that the method of transfer in the presence of all three parties applies in all cases, regardless of whether the third party was born at the time that the loan was given. So it's a big shaila. Okay, we're going to Mitzvah Shem at 2 o'clock. We will continue Daf Yudaled, and we will finish the Perek today, Be'ezus Hashem Yisborech, at 2 o'clock.